Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. I wanted to provide additional commentary about the ongoing conflict that we are seeing in the the Promised Land. So first, apologize some of my verbiage. The current platform and other platforms are very sensitive to this area of the world. And ultimately, talking about issues going on, say, in the the Promised Land, tend to get demonetized and or shut down. For whatever reason, the large tech companies do not want you to have information about conflicts. They want you to absorb that information from the likes of cable news network. So again, I have to be a little bit careful. Otherwise, you won't get this information. Simple as that. Now, a lot of verbiage, a lot of discussion is happening right now about the ongoing operation that is taking place both by the Israelis and obviously the initial operation that was launched by Hamas. And some are saying this is, or this was, the greatest threat to Israeli security for decades upon decades and decades, and they're comparing this to the maybe to the Yom Kippur War in 1973. Look, this is nothing even close to Yom Kippur. This is a somewhat localized security issue for the Israelis. Yes, Hamas forces have crossed from the Gaza Strip into Israel. They have attacked localized settlements, but let's apply some reason to this. Okay? Yes, they have launched rocket attacks against civilian areas, and they have attacked non-hardened civilian targets. There's an erroneous video of Israeli F-16s being transported by trucks out of military bases. That was a previous video. That is not in response to what's happening in the Gaza Strip. So again, if you compare and contrast Yom Kippur, 1973. Now, obviously, one of the largest achievements of Arab forces was the Egyptian crossing of the Suez Canal. Here's the Suez Canal. This is the Sinai. This was Egypt proper. The crossing of the the crossing of the Suez Canal, and how the Egyptians conducted that operation was very impressive. And indeed, it had the Israelis on their heels, without a doubt. Now, if the Egyptian military did not follow certain levels of Soviet doctrine, that war may have had a different outcome. If the Egyptian army, the Egyptian divisions and corps that had crossed into the Sinai Peninsula after the crossing over the Suez, had the initiative to conduct further operations, it may have looked differently. But because of the limiting factor in the Egyptian army, especially in terms of Egyptian battlefield commander initiative, battalion commanders, company commanders, even brigade commanders were operating on these set-piece scenarios, objectives, and it failed. They did not move fast enough. But, again, crossing the Sinai, crossing the Suez Canal, surprised the Israelis. And then combining that with the Syrian operations in the north, indeed, that operation, that war by Syria and Egypt attacking Israel was much more threatening from a military perspective, from a military standpoint, than what we're seeing now. I even listened to one completely incompetent news reporter talking about that Hamas is seeking to occupy Israel. Come on. Way overblown. Is this operation being way overblown in terms of capability? It is. It is. It absolutely is. Hamas, they are not going after hard targets. They're going after some. They're going after some Israeli units that are on the border of Gaza and Israel proper. But is this by any means a strategic threat like the 1973 Yom Kippur War was to the state of Israel? Absolutely not. You cannot even compare those two wars. What's happening now with what's happening with what happened in 1973. Completely different. In that conflict, in 1973, you had vast Arab armies. You had the Syrian Arab army and the Egyptian military launching massive core-sized operations with thousands of main battle tanks, hundreds of thousands of troops. Completely different. Air forces involved. Completely different than what we're seeing now. And it's really kind of a disservice to journalism to hear some of these journalists report that Hamas could be in any way threatening the state of Israel. Ultimately, again, it is localized tactical issues near the border. Some of the small border towns, yes, are absolutely seeing challenges. But to say that beyond this is the capability of Hamas to even remotely harm the state of Israel from a strategic perspective is nonsensical. Even if Hezbollah were to get involved in this conflict, again, localized, you would see fighting taking place near the borders of Lebanon. You would see, in all probability, quite a few rockets being fired into Israel. But ultimately, Israel would respond. And eventually, those rocket attacks would subside, and you would see an all-out military invasion by the IDF of southern Lebanon. And at this point, it appears that Hezbollah does not want to get involved in this conflict. If it did, my guess is we would have seen a joint Hezbollah operation against the Israelis. We have not seen that yet. We would have seen an Iranian operation against the Israelis. I think right now the Iranians in Hezbollah, while showing verbal support for Hamas, They do not want to get involved in this conflict. And Hamas has sealed its fate. I firmly believe that that organization is going to cease to exist in the coming days and weeks. You are going to see an unprecedented operation by the Israelis against the Gaza Strip. Far more than what we have ever seen before. But to compare and contrast Yom Kippur with what's happening now, I mean, you can, but not even close. Not even in the same, remotely same hemisphere. It's just not. It really isn't. But we will continue to watch. We will continue to report. And we will also do some analysis of the TikTok generation of the IDF. Has TikTok and some of these far left mind viruses, have they infiltrated and seeded the Israeli military? I would say yes. And we have seen some really bizarre TikTok videos coming out of the IDF, and you would think to yourself, how on earth, at least in terms of seeing what we have seen on these TikTok videos, is the IDF allowing some of this stuff to go on? I get that the IDF has always been a fairly undisciplined fighting force, meaning when you compare and contrast maybe to the discipline level within the United States, based on my experience of actually working with Israeli units, they operate much differently than their U.S. counterparts. Now, does that degrade their capabilities? No, it doesn't. They just do different things different ways. But ultimately, they're a pretty proficient fighting force. They just look different, operate different. But maybe I'll talk more about that in the near future. Again, thanks for joining us. More to come. As always, have a good day.